Once upon a time, there was a woman named Wilma Azell. She was not rich. She was not powerful. She wore the same 3 dresses and walked everywhere in worn shoes. But everyone on her street knew one thing about her: Wilma had a heart that hunger could not shrink. Every evening when the streetlights flickered on, Wilma returned from her cleaning jobs. Her hands smelled of bleach. Her back ached. Her shoes had holes that let in the rain. Still, she always paused at her door, looked up at the darkening sky, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." She climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment. 3 flights up. The walls were stained. The hallway smelled of old cooking oil and cigarette smoke. Her door creaked when it opened. Inside, the room was barely large enough for a bed, a hot plate, and a small table. But Wilma never complained. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 100 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Also, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into the story. She washed her face in cold water. She changed into house clothes, a faded shirt with a missing button. Then she stood at her tiny counter and prepared her dinner. Rice. A little oil. Sometimes an egg. The pot was small, but she stirred it carefully, talking to herself like an old friend was listening. "God will make a way," she said softly. "He always does." When the food was ready, Wilma divided it onto 2 plates. One for now. One for later, or so she told herself. But every night, before she could take her first bite, she heard it. A sound from the street below. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Limping. Wilma set down her spoon and moved to the window. She pulled back the thin curtain and looked down at the sidewalk. There it was again. The dog. It appeared every night, always at the same time, always in the same spot. It stood beneath the broken streetlight, just beyond the reach of the shadows. Its body was lean, too lean. Its fur was matted and dirty. One of its paws was swollen, dragging slightly as it walked. But what caught Wilma's attention was not the dirt or the limp. It was the dog's eyes. They were not wild. They were not desperate. They were calm. Watching. Waiting. Wilma's chest tightened. She had seen strays before, dogs that snarled, that lunged at trash cans, that fought each other for scraps. But this dog was different. It sat. It waited. It never barked. It never begged. It just watched her window. Wilma looked down at her 2 plates of food. Her stomach growled. She closed her eyes and sighed. Then she picked up the second plate, wrapped it in a piece of cloth, and carried it downstairs. The night air was cold. The street was empty except for a few shadowed figures in doorways. Wilma's footsteps echoed on the pavement. The dog did not move as she approached. It sat perfectly still, its eyes locked on her. "Here," Wilma said softly, kneeling down. She placed the plate on the ground and slid it forward. The dog waited. It did not rush. It did not snatch. It looked at Wilma, really looked at her, then lowered its head and ate slowly, carefully, as if it had been taught. Wilma watched, her heart beating strangely in her chest. "You're not like the others," she whispered. The dog finished eating. Then it sat again, watching her. Wilma smiled. "Good night," she said. She turned and walked back inside. Behind her, the dog remained. Silent. Still. Guarding the empty street. That became their routine. Every evening. Rain or cold. Wilma came down with food. The dog waited. It ate with discipline. It never took more than she gave. And when she left, it watched her window until she disappeared inside. But others began to notice. One evening, as Wilma descended the stairs with her plate, her neighbor, a man named Carl who sold phone cards on the corner, stepped in front of her. "Sister," he said, his voice low. "You need to stop." Wilma blinked. "Stop what?" "Feeding that dog." He glanced toward the street. "People are talking." Wilma frowned. "It's just a dog." Carl shook his head slowly. "That's not just a dog." Wilma felt something cold slide down her spine. "What do you mean?" Carl looked around, then leaned closer. "That animal doesn't belong to nobody around here. You understand? Dogs like that, they come from somewhere else. Somewhere dangerous." Wilma's hands tightened on the plate. "You're saying someone owns it?" "I'm saying you don't want to know who owns it." Carl's eyes were serious. "Please, sister. Let it go." He walked away before she could respond. Wilma stood there, the plate growing cold in her hands. She looked toward the street. The dog was already there, sitting in its usual spot, waiting. Her heart beat faster. She remembered a time when she was young, so hungry her hands shook, watching people eat through restaurant windows, invisible and forgotten. She remembered what it felt like to be ignored. Wilma swallowed hard and walked forward. "I don't care who you belong to," she whispered as she placed the food down. "You're hungry. That's all that matters." The dog ate. Wilma watched. And across the street, hidden in the shadow of a parked car, a man in a dark suit lowered his binoculars. He pulled out his phone. "Boss," he said quietly. "I found her." But to understand how Wilma Azell, a woman with nothing, came to change the life of Jose Willis, a man who controlled everything, we must go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the day the dog first appeared. It had been a Tuesday evening when Wilma first saw the dog lying at the bottom of her apartment stairs. Its body was pressed against the concrete, ribs visible through matted fur, one front paw swollen and raw. The dog didn't growl or bark. It simply lifted its head and watched her with pale, intelligent eyes. Wilma should have walked past. Should have minded her own business. But she didn't. She went inside, scooped half her dinner onto a plate, and brought it down. The dog stared at the food but didn't move. "Go on," Wilma said softly. "Eat." Still, it waited. Then Wilma understood. It was waiting for permission. She nodded. "Yes. You can eat." Only then did the dog stand, slowly, carefully, and eat. Not desperately. Not wildly. It chewed with discipline, paused between bites, and even left a small portion on the plate. Wilma watched, her heart beating strangely. This was no ordinary stray. From that night on, the dog returned every evening. Always at the same time. Always in the same spot beneath the broken streetlight. And every evening, Wilma brought it food. Some nights, she had enough. Other nights, she split her own meal in half and went to bed with her stomach growling. But she never missed a night. "You're going to starve yourself," she muttered one evening as she divided a small portion of rice. "This is foolish." But even as she said it, she was already heading downstairs. The dog sat waiting, perfectly upright, its eyes fixed on her window as if it had been counting the minutes. Wilma smiled. "You're very punctual." The dog's tail swept the ground once. As the days passed, Wilma began to notice things. The way the dog sat, shoulders square, head high, alert. The way it scanned the street constantly, watching every shadow, every passing car. The way it positioned itself between her and the road, as if guarding her. One evening, a drunk man stumbled toward them, shouting. The dog stood immediately. Its body went rigid. A low growl rumbled in its chest, so quiet Wilma almost didn't hear it. But the man heard. He stopped, stared at the dog, then turned and walked quickly away. Wilma's hands trembled. You didn't even have to bark. The dog sat back down calmly. This was not a lost pet. This was a trained protector. 2 weeks after the dog first appeared, Wilma walked 3 blocks to the corner pharmacy. She pulled out the envelope from under her mattress, her emergency savings, and bought antiseptic, bandages, and antibiotic ointment. It was the last of her money. That evening, she knelt beside the dog with the supplies. I need to look at your paw, she said gently. The dog tensed but didn't pull away. Wilma cleaned the wound carefully. The dog whimpered once but stayed still. I know it hurts, she whispered. I'm sorry. She wrapped the paw in gauze and tied it gently. When she finished, the dog did something it had never done before. It leaned forward and pressed its head against her chest. Wilma's breath caught. She wrapped her arms around it and held on. You're going to be okay, she whispered. But even as she said it, fear crept into her heart. Because she knew, deep down, she knew, this dog belonged to someone else. Someone who was probably looking for it. Someone dangerous. That night, Wilma lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her savings were gone. Her stomach was empty. But downstairs, beneath the broken streetlight, a dog stood guard. And for the first time in years, Wilma didn't feel alone. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, Please, God. Let me keep him just a little longer. But across the city, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering skyline, Jose Willis stared at a photograph on his phone. A grainy surveillance image of a woman kneeling on a sidewalk, feeding his dog. His jaw tightened. Find out everything about her, he said quietly. Everything. The whispers started small. At first, Wilma didn't notice them. She was too focused on her routine, work, home, feed the dog, sleep. The days blurred together in a rhythm of exhaustion and quiet purpose. But then the looks began. Mrs. Chen from the second floor stopped smiling when they passed in the hallway. The teenagers who usually sat on the stoop smoking moved to the other side of the street when Wilma came home. Even the bodega owner, who had always been friendly, now handed her change without meeting her eyes. One evening, as Wilma descended the stairs with her plate of food, she heard voices. 2 women stood near the mailboxes, their conversation dropping to whispers as she approached. Every single night. Asking for trouble. Doesn't know what she's doing. Wilma's steps slowed, but she kept walking. The women fell silent as she passed, their eyes following her. Outside, the dog was waiting. It sat in its usual spot, perfectly still, its bandaged paw healing slowly. When it saw her, its ears perked forward. Wilma knelt and placed the food down, trying to ignore the weight of the stares she felt from the windows above. People are talking about us, she whispered to the dog. I don't think they approve. The dog ate calmly, unbothered. Wilma wished she could be as unbothered. 3 days later, Carl stopped her. She was halfway down the stairs, plate in hand, when he stepped out from the shadows beneath the stairwell. Wilma, he said. His voice was serious in a way she'd never heard before. "We need to talk." Wilma's grip tightened on the plate. "About what?" Carl glanced up and down the street, then moved closer. "About that dog." "What about it?" "You need to stop feeding it." Wilma frowned. "Carl, it's just—" "It's not just a dog," Carl interrupted. His eyes were hard. "Listen to me. I've lived on these streets my whole life. I know things. I see things. And that animal—" He pointed toward the street where the dog sat waiting. "That dog belongs to someone you don't want to know." Wilma's heart beat faster. "Who?" Carl shook his head. "I don't know names. Nobody does. But dogs like that, trained like that, they don't come from normal people. They come from the kind of people who make other people disappear." The words hung in the air between them. Wilma swallowed. "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to protect you," Carl said. His voice softened. "You're a good woman, Wilma. Everybody knows that. But goodness doesn't protect you from bad people. That dog will bring trouble to your door. Maybe it already has." He walked away before she could respond. Wilma stood there, the plate growing cold in her hands. She looked toward the street. The dog was watching her, head tilted slightly, as if asking a question. Wilma's hands trembled. But then she remembered something. A memory from years ago, sitting outside a restaurant, so hungry her vision blurred, watching people eat through the window. No one had stopped to help. No one had even looked at her. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Wilma took a deep breath and walked forward. "I don't care what they say," she whispered as she set the food down. "You're hungry. That's all that matters." The dog ate slowly, as always. And Wilma felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever was coming, let it come. She had chosen kindness. She would not apologize for it. But over the next few days, the peace began to crack. Wilma noticed them on her way home from work. Black cars. Sleek and expensive. They didn't belong in her neighborhood where most people drove rusted sedans or took the bus. The first time, she thought it was coincidence. A wrong turn, maybe. Someone visiting from another part of the city. But then she saw another one. Parked at the corner, windows tinted dark, engine idling. And another. Slowly cruising past her building, the driver's face hidden behind sunglasses. Wilma's stomach tightened. One evening, as she fed the dog, she glanced over her shoulder and saw it again, a black sedan parked across the street, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. Someone was inside. She could see the silhouette. Watching. The dog noticed too. Its body went still, ears forward, eyes fixed on the car. Wilma's breath came faster. "We should go inside," she whispered. But the dog didn't move. It stayed between her and the car, a silent guardian. The sedan's engine started. Slowly, it pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the night. Wilma stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding. She looked down at the dog. "Who are you?" she asked. "And who's looking for you?" The dog gazed up at her with those calm, intelligent eyes. And for the first time, Wilma wondered if Carl had been right. Maybe trouble was already at her door. Maybe it had been there all along. That night, Wilma barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every creak of the building, every car that passed. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and whispered into the silence. "What have I done?" But outside, beneath the broken streetlight, the dog remained. Standing guard. Waiting. And across the city, Jose Willis looked at the photograph one more time. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We go tomorrow." It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. Wilma came home later than usual. The bus had broken down, forcing her to walk the last mile in shoes that pinched her feet. By the time she reached her building, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. She climbed the stairs quickly, ignoring the ache in her legs. Inside her apartment, she moved with practiced efficiency, heating leftover rice, adding a bit of oil, dividing it onto 2 plates. One for her. One for the dog. The rain began to fall harder, drumming against the window. Wilma wrapped the dog's portion in cloth and headed downstairs, pulling her thin jacket tighter against the cold. But when she reached the street, the dog wasn't there. Wilma stopped at the bottom of the stairs, rain soaking through her jacket. The spot beneath the broken streetlight was empty. "Maybe he's late," she said aloud, her voice small against the sound of the rain. She walked to the usual spot and set the plate down, then stepped back and waited. Minutes passed. The rain fell harder, turning the street into a river of dirty water. The plate began to fill with rainwater, the rice turning to mush. Still, Wilma waited. Her hair plastered to her face. Her clothes heavy and cold. Her hands trembling, not from the chill, but from something else. Something deeper. "Come on," she whispered. "Where are you?" But the street remained empty. After half an hour, Wilma picked up the ruined plate and walked back inside, water dripping behind her with each step. The next evening, the dog didn't come. Wilma waited again. This time without rain, but with a growing knot in her stomach that made it hard to breathe. She stood there for an hour, watching every shadow, listening for the familiar sound of limping footsteps. Nothing. On the 3rd night, she brought food and waited until midnight. The streetlight flickered above her. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across her like searchlights. But the dog never appeared. By the end of the week, Wilma had stopped sleeping properly. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, playing through scenarios in her mind. Maybe the dog had found its way home. Maybe its real owner had finally found it. Maybe it was somewhere safe and warm, being cared for properly. But other thoughts crept in too. Darker thoughts. Maybe it had been hit by a car. Maybe it had collapsed somewhere, its infected paw finally giving out. Maybe someone had hurt it. Maybe she had failed it. "I should have done more," she whispered to the empty room. "I should have taken it to a vet. I should have kept it inside." But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't possible. The dog had never tried to follow her inside. It had always kept its post on the street, as if bound by some invisible duty. As if it was waiting for someone else. Wilma covered her face with her hands. She had known, somewhere deep down, she had always known, that the dog wasn't hers to keep. It belonged to someone. Someone who would come for it eventually. But knowing didn't make the loss hurt any less. The neighborhood noticed too. Mrs. Chen nodded at her again in the hallway, the coldness gone from her eyes. Carl gave her a sympathetic look when their paths crossed. "The dog's gone?" he asked gently. Wilma nodded, not trusting her voice. "Maybe that's for the best," Carl said. But his tone was kind, not judgmental. Wilma wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel relief. But all she felt was hollow. 2 weeks after the dog disappeared, the street felt different. Quieter. Emptier. Wilma noticed it most in the evenings when she came home. The usual sounds, the teenagers laughing, music playing from open windows, neighbors arguing, all seemed muted somehow. Or maybe it was just her. She walked past the spot where the dog used to wait. Someone had placed a plastic bag over the broken streetlight, and now the corner sat in deeper shadow. Wilma paused there, her hand reaching out to touch the lamppost. "I hope you're okay," she whispered. "Wherever you are." The wind picked up, scattering trash down the street. And then Wilma felt it. A prickling on the back of her neck. The sensation of being watched. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the street. A black car sat at the far corner, partially hidden by shadows. The same kind she'd seen before. Wilma's heart began to race. The car's engine started. But instead of driving away, it moved forward, slowly, coming closer. Wilma took a step back toward her building. The car stopped directly across from her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the back window rolled down halfway. Just enough for Wilma to see the silhouette of someone sitting inside. Watching her. Wilma's breath caught in her throat. The window rolled back up. The car pulled away smoothly and disappeared around the corner. Wilma stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, a change, vast and unstoppable, moving toward her like a storm. She hurried inside, climbed the stairs on shaking legs, and locked her door. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat by the window, looking down at the empty street, and waited. For what, she didn't know. But she knew it was coming soon. 3 weeks after the dog disappeared, they came. It was a Saturday afternoon. Wilma had just returned from the laundromat, carrying a plastic bag of damp clothes that she would hang to dry in her small apartment. The air was thick and humid, the kind of heat that made everything feel slow and heavy. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard the engines. Not 1. 3. Deep, powerful sounds that didn't belong in her neighborhood. Wilma paused, her hand gripping the railing. Through the stairwell window, she saw them pulling up to the curb. 3 black cars. Sleek and expensive, their paint so glossy they looked like they'd just rolled off a showroom floor. Her stomach dropped. The first car stopped directly in front of her building. The second and third flanked it, forming a semicircle that blocked the street. Wilma's bag of clothes slipped from her hand, landing with a wet thump on the stairs. The doors opened. Men stepped out, 6 of them. All wearing dark suits that fit too perfectly. All moving with the same controlled precision, like soldiers or dancers who'd rehearsed every step. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Wilma's legs wouldn't move. She stood frozen on the stairs, watching through the dirty window as the men surveyed the street. One of them spoke into a phone. Another adjusted his jacket, and Wilma caught a glimpse of something beneath it, a holster, maybe, or just the suggestion of one. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This is because of the dog, she thought. This is because I didn't listen. Because I kept feeding it. Wilma Azell. The voice came from below. Wilma's head snapped toward the sound. One of the men stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her. He was younger than the others, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate everything in an instant. "Why yes," Wilma stammered. "Come down, please." It wasn't a request. Wilma's hands shook as she gripped the railing. Her mind raced through possibilities, running back to her apartment, locking the door, calling for help. But who would help her? Who could? She descended slowly, each step feeling like walking toward the edge of a cliff. When she reached the bottom, the man stepped aside, gesturing toward the street. Outside. Wilma's legs moved on their own, carrying her through the doorway and into the humid afternoon air. The street had gone silent. Windows that were usually open had closed. The teenagers who normally lounged on the stoop had vanished. Even the traffic seemed to have stopped, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The men in suits stood in a loose formation around her, not touching, not threatening, but unmistakably surrounding her. Wilma's vision blurred at the edges. Her chest felt tight. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. Instead, one of the men, the largest, with shoulders like a linebacker, moved to the middle car and opened the back door. He stood there, waiting. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure emerged from the car. A man. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Wilma made in a year. His black hair was swept back from his face, revealing sharp cheekbones and a jawline that looked carved from stone. But it was his eyes that stopped Wilma's breath. They were dark, intense, and locked directly on her. He moved with purpose, his steps measured and deliberate. The other men parted immediately, creating a path. He stopped 3 feet in front of Wilma. Up close, she could see the fine details, the silver cufflinks at his wrists, the subtle pattern in his tie, the small scar above his left eyebrow. And something else. His eyes weren't cold. They were searching. Almost vulnerable. "Wilma Azell," he said. His voice was deep, accented slightly, Korean, she thought, though she'd never been good with accents. Wilma nodded, unable to speak. The man studied her face for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. Wilma flinched. But he pulled out a phone and turned the screen toward her. On it was a photograph. Wilma's breath caught. It was her. Taken from across the street, probably weeks ago. She was kneeling on the sidewalk, placing a plate of food on the ground. And beside her, eating carefully from the plate, was the dog. "You fed him," the man said quietly. It wasn't a question. Wilma's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know." "Every day," the man continued, his voice tightening. "Even when you had nothing. Even when you went hungry yourself." Wilma looked up at him, confused and terrified. The man's jaw clenched. His hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then, to Wilma's absolute shock, he lowered himself to one knee. Right there, in front of her building, in front of his men, in front of the entire watching neighborhood, he knelt. And when he looked up at her, his eyes were glistening. "My name is Jose Willis," he said. "And you saved the only thing in this world I love." The street held its breath. Wilma's tears spilled over. And somewhere deep in her chest, she felt something shift, like the world had tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. Wilma stared down at the man kneeling before her, her mind refusing to make sense of what she was seeing. Men like him didn't kneel. Men in $1,000 suits with armed guards and black cars, they didn't lower themselves to anyone, especially not to a cleaning woman in worn shoes and a faded dress. But here he was. On one knee. In front of her entire neighborhood. "Please," Wilma whispered, her voice shaking. "Please stand up. You don't need to." "I do," Jose said firmly. His accent was more pronounced now, emotion bleeding through his controlled exterior. "You don't understand what you've done." Wilma's hands twisted together. "I just fed a dog. That's all. I didn't know, I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Trouble?" Jose's voice cracked slightly. He stood slowly, and Wilma realized he was taller than she'd thought. But there was nothing threatening about him now. He looked like a man barely holding himself together. He gestured to one of his men, who immediately stepped forward with a tablet. Jose took it and turned it toward Wilma. "This is Quan," he said quietly. The screen showed a photograph of the dog, but not the starving, injured animal Wilma had known. This dog was magnificent. Sleek, muscular, with glossy fur and alert eyes. It sat beside a younger version of Jose, both of them looking at the camera with the same intense, watchful expression. "He's been with me for 8 years, Jose continued. Since he was a puppy. I trained him myself. Fed him myself. He slept at the foot of my bed. He went everywhere with me." Jose swiped to another photo. This one showed the dog standing in front of Jose, teeth bared, facing someone outside the frame. 2 months ago, someone I trusted tried to kill me. Jose's voice went flat, emotionless, the voice of a man recounting trauma he'd buried deep. A business partner. Someone I'd known for 15 years. He came to my office with 3 men. They had guns. Silencers. Wilma's hand moved to her throat. Quan attacked before they could fire. He went for the first man's throat. Gave me time to reach my weapon. Jose's jaw tightened. I survived. My guards arrived. But in the chaos, someone shot Quan. I saw him go down. I saw the blood. He swiped to another image, a security photo showing a blur of motion, men running, and in the corner, a dog limping toward an open door. He disappeared. Ran into the streets while we were still fighting. By the time I could search for him, he was gone. Jose's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I had every man I have looking. Every contact. Every resource. I destroyed the people who betrayed me, but I couldn't find him. He looked up at Wilma, and she saw something raw in his eyes. I thought he was dead. I mourned him. Jose swiped to the final image, the surveillance photo of Wilma kneeling on the sidewalk, the dog eating from her plate. 3 weeks ago, one of my men spotted him on your street. He was following up on a different matter, checking surveillance footage for something unrelated. And there he was. Jose's finger trembled slightly as he pointed at the screen. Alive. With you. Wilma's vision blurred with tears. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't. I watched you, Jose interrupted. For 2 weeks, I had cameras on this street. I watched you feed him every single night. I watched you spend your last money on medicine for his paw. I watched you go without food so he could eat. He pulled up video footage, grainy but clear enough. Wilma saw herself on the screen, kneeling in the rain, waiting for the dog that wouldn't come. You waited for him in the rain for over an hour, Jose said, his voice thick. You cried when he didn't show up. Wilma covered her mouth with her hand. Jose turned off the tablet and handed it back to his man. Then he looked at Wilma with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and disbelief. Do you know what Quan is? He asked. Wilma shook her head. He's a protection dog. Trained to be suspicious of everyone. Trained to accept food only from me. Trained to attack anyone who shows aggression. Jose's voice grew stronger. My enemies know about him. They know what he's capable of. Some of the most dangerous men in this city are afraid of that dog. He stepped closer, and Wilma instinctively stepped back. Jose stopped immediately, giving her space. You fed what even my enemies feared, he said quietly. A starving, injured animal that could have killed you with one bite. And you did it with kindness. Without asking for anything. Without knowing who he belonged to. Wilma's tears spilled over. He was hungry. What else could I do? Jose stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He smiled. It was small, sad, and genuine, the smile of a man who'd forgotten what real goodness looked like. What else could you do? He repeated softly, as if the words were foreign to him. Ms. Azel, you're going to be very confused about what happens next. Wilma's heart raced. What do you mean? Jose straightened his jacket, and just like that, the vulnerability disappeared. The powerful man returned, controlled, commanding, dangerous. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. I owe you a debt I can never repay, he said. But I'm going to try. Wilma stood frozen, trying to process Jose's words. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was just food. Anyone would have. No, Jose cut her off, his tone sharp. Not anyone. You think people in this city stop for starving dogs? You think they spend their last dollar on bandages for an animal that isn't theirs? He gestured toward the buildings around them. I had cameras on this street for 2 weeks. Do you know how many people walked past Quan? Hundreds. Do you know how many stopped to help? Wilma didn't answer. One, Jose said. You. One of the suited men stepped forward and whispered something in Jose's ear. Jose nodded, then turned back to Wilma. Ms. Azel, do you know who I am? Wilma shook her head. Jose's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe, or surprise. Good, he said quietly. That means you helped Quan because you're kind, not because you wanted something from me. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I control significant interests in this city. Business operations that span from the waterfront to the financial district. My organization handles imports, exports, protection services, and various other enterprises. Wilma's stomach tightened. She understood what he wasn't saying. People know my name, Jose continued, his voice flat. Some respect it. Some fear it. Police commissioners, judges, politicians, they all know who I am. They know what happens when someone crosses me. He looked directly at her. I have spent 15 years building an empire where loyalty is everything. Where betrayal is answered with violence. Where weakness gets you killed. Wilma's hands trembled. I am not a good man, Ms. Azel. Jose's jaw tightened. I have destroyed people. Ruined families. Done things that would keep you awake at night if you knew the details. A cold fear crept up Wilma's spine. She glanced at the men surrounding them, silent, watchful, dangerous. But in all those years, Jose's voice softened, I have never encountered someone like you. Someone who saw something connected to my world and responded with pure kindness. No agenda. No fear. Just compassion. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a document. After we found Quan with you, I had you investigated. Thoroughly. He showed her the screen. It was a file with her name at the top, filled with information. Her work history, her address, her bank statements. Wilma's breath caught. You work 3 cleaning jobs. You make $900 a month. Your rent is $500. You skip meals regularly. You haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. Jose's voice grew quieter with each sentence. You have $17 in your bank account. And you spent 12 of those dollars on medicine for my dog. Tears welled in Wilma's eyes. You gave him your food when you were hungry. You waited in the rain for him. You mourned him when he disappeared. Jose looked at her with something close to wonder. Quan is trained to detect threats, to read intentions. He's bitten men who tried to hurt me. But with you? He shook his head slowly. He trusted you immediately. And Quan's judgment has never been wrong. Jose straightened, and the powerful businessman returned, controlled, commanding. Ms. Azel, I owe you a debt. In my world, debts are sacred. They must be paid. You don't owe me anything, Wilma said quickly. I didn't know he was yours. I just. That's exactly why I owe you everything, Jose interrupted. You helped him because it was right. Not because you knew who I was. Not because you wanted a reward. He gestured to one of his men, who immediately pulled out a leather portfolio. I'm offering you a choice, Jose said. Money, enough that you never have to work another cleaning job. A new apartment, anywhere in the city you want. A car. Security. Protection. Anything you need, for the rest of your life. Wilma stared at him, overwhelmed. I can't accept that. I can't take money from, she stopped, not wanting to say the words. From a criminal? Jose finished for her, a bitter smile on his lips. I understand. But understand this, Ms. Azel, whether you accept my offer or not, you are now under my protection. Anyone who harms you answers to me. Anyone who threatens you will disappear. The words should have terrified her. But the way he said them, with absolute certainty, made them feel like a promise rather than a threat. Where is he? Wilma asked suddenly. Where's Quan? For the first time, Jose's expression softened completely. He turned toward the first car and nodded. The door opened. And out stepped the dog. But not the starving, limping creature Wilma had known. This was Quan, fully healed, strong, sleek, powerful. His coat gleamed. His injured paw was completely healed. He moved with grace and confidence. But when his eyes found Wilma, something changed. His ears perked forward. His tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. And then he did something that made every one of Jose's men stare in shock. He pulled away from his handler and ran straight to Wilma. Wilma dropped to her knees as Quan reached her. The dog pressed against her, whining softly, his whole body wiggling with joy. Wilma wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his fur. You're okay, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You're okay. Jose watched them, his expression unreadable. Then he knelt beside them both. He hasn't acted like this since the attack, Jose said quietly. Not even with me. You gave him something I couldn't, kindness when he had nothing. Wilma looked up at Jose through her tears. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just about repaying a debt. This was about a man who'd lived in darkness for so long that he'd forgotten what light looked like. Until a poor woman with nothing showed him. If you're enjoying the story, comment yes. Wilma stayed kneeling on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped around Quan, her tears soaking into his fur. The dog pressed closer, as if trying to comfort her, his warmth solid and real against her chest. Jose remained beside them, silent, giving her the moment. Finally, Wilma pulled back and wiped her eyes. She looked at Jose, then at the men surrounding them, then at the expensive cars that didn't belong in her neighborhood. I can't take your money, she said quietly. Jose's expression didn't change. Ms. Azel. No, Wilma's voice was firmer now. She stood slowly, and Quan stood with her, pressed against her leg. I fed Quan because he was hungry. Because it was the right thing to do. Not because I wanted something from you. I know that, Jose said. Then you must understand why I can't accept what you're offering. Wilma's hands twisted together. That money, it comes from things I don't want to know about. From people getting hurt. From crime, Jose finished. His voice was neutral, but his eyes were watchful. You can say it. Wilma nodded. I'm not judging you. I don't know your life or what brought you to this. But I do know myself. And I know I couldn't live with myself if I took money that came from suffering. The street was completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Jose studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile this time, sad but genuine. You're a rare person, Ms. Azel, he said. Most people I meet would take the money and tell themselves they deserved it. That they'd earned it somehow. Maybe they're smarter than me, Wilma said. No, Jose shook his head. They're just more used to compromise. He straightened his jacket and turned to one of his men. Cancel the cash delivery. Return the apartment keys. The man nodded and pulled out his phone. Wilma felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Had she just insulted him? Would he be angry? But Jose turned back to her, and his expression was thoughtful, not angry. You won't take blood money, he said. I respect that. But Ms. Azel, you helped me. That creates an obligation I can't ignore. So let me offer you something else. What? Wilma asked warily. Legitimate help. Jose pulled out his phone and made a call. Mr. Park. It's Willis. I need you to clear something for me. Yes, immediately. He hung up and looked at Wilma. You have debt, yes. Medical bills from 3 years ago. Back rent from when you were sick. Wilma's eyes widened. How do you? I told you. I investigated. Jose's voice was matter-of-fact. Those debts will be cleared by tomorrow morning. Not by me directly, by a charitable foundation that handles these things. You'll receive a letter. It's legal, it's clean, and it has nothing to do with my other business. I don't understand, Wilma whispered. I own several legitimate businesses, Ms. Azel. Real estate holdings, a security company, import operations that are completely legal. Not everything I do is criminal. He paused. Though I won't pretend the legal businesses aren't built on illegal foundations. Another man approached and handed Jose a business card. Jose held it out to Wilma. This is the manager of one of my commercial properties downtown. Office building, completely legitimate. They need a facilities director, someone to oversee the cleaning staff, maintenance, building operations. The pay is $45,000 a year. Benefits. Retirement. All legal. Wilma stared at the card. That's 5 times what I make now. You'd be qualified. You've been cleaning offices for 15 years. You know the work. You know what good management looks like because you've seen bad management. Jose's voice was calm, reasonable. It's a real job, Ms. Azel. You'd have to work for it. But you'd be safe. Respected. And you'd never have to scrub another toilet unless you wanted to. Wilma's hand shook as she took the card. Why? She asked. Why go to all this trouble? Jose looked at Quan, who was still pressed against Wilma's leg, looking up at her with devoted eyes. Because you gave him kindness when he had nothing, Jose said quietly. Because you showed me that goodness still exists in this city. And because, he paused, struggling with words. Because I need to believe that the good I do can outweigh the bad. Even if it's just a little. Wilma looked down at the card, then at Quan, then at Jose. The job is real? She asked. Not charity. You'll work. You'll earn it. Jose's voice was firm. But you'll also be safe. Anyone in my organization will know that you're under my protection. Not because you work for me, because you helped Quan. That means something. Wilma felt tears threatening again. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take the job. Jose gestured to Quan. And say you'll let him visit you sometimes. Wilma looked down at the dog. Quan's tail wagged slowly, hopefully. He can visit? She asked. Once a week. I'll bring him myself. Jose's expression softened. He's been different since you fed him. Calmer. Happier. I think he needs you as much as you needed him. Wilma knelt and cupped Quan's face in her hands. The dog licked her cheek, and despite everything, the fear, the shock, the impossibility of it all, Wilma laughed. Okay, she said, looking up at Jose. Okay. I'll take the job. Jose nodded, and for a moment, something like relief crossed his face. Good. He reached down and scratched Quan behind the ears. You hear that, boy? You get to see your friend. Quan's tail wagged harder. Jose stood and gestured to his men. They immediately began moving toward the cars. Wait, Wilma said suddenly. Jose turned back. Thank you, Wilma said. For respecting my choice. For not forcing me to take what I didn't feel right about. Jose looked at her for a long moment. No, Ms. Azelle, he said quietly. Thank you. For reminding me that kindness exists. For showing me that not everything in this world has a price. He walked to his car, Quan following reluctantly, looking back at Wilma every few steps. Jose paused at the car door. Someone will contact you tomorrow about the job. And Ms. Azelle? Yes. Anyone who harms you harms me. Remember that. Then he got in the car, and all three vehicles pulled away smoothly, disappearing around the corner as if they'd never been there at all. Wilma stood alone on the sidewalk, holding a business card, her life forever changed. And for the first time in years, she felt hope. The next morning, Wilma woke to sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment, she lay still, wondering if yesterday had been a dream. The black cars, the suited men, Jose Willis kneeling before her, it all seemed too impossible to be real. But then she saw the business card on her small table, and she knew. It had happened. All of it. She sat up slowly, her body aching from tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. But today, something felt different. Lighter. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. The spot where Quan used to wait was empty. The broken streetlight still flickered. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had, worn, tired, forgotten. But Wilma saw it differently now. She saw possibility. The letter arrived that afternoon. Wilma held the envelope with trembling hands, afraid to open it. But when she finally tore it open, the words made her knees weak. Dear Ms. Azelle. We are pleased to inform you that your outstanding debts with Mercy Medical Center and Riverside Property Management have been satisfied through the generosity of the Chen Foundation's Financial Hardship Relief Program. No further payment is required. This matter is now closed, *. Wilma read it 3 times, her eyes blurring with tears. 3 years. For 3 years, those debts had hung over her like storm clouds. She'd sent small payments when she could, watched the interest grow when she couldn't, and lived with the constant fear of collection calls and legal threats. And now, just like that, they were gone. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." 2 days later, Wilma stood outside a gleaming office building downtown, staring up at the glass and steel tower that seemed to touch the sky. She wore the one dress she'd kept nice for occasions she'd never had, a simple navy blue with a collar that she'd ironed 3 times that morning. Her hands clutched her worn purse, and her heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've earned this." She walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that smelled like expensive coffee and floor polish. A security guard nodded at her. A woman in a sharp suit smiled as she passed. Wilma found the elevator and pressed the button for the 9th floor. When the doors opened, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and graying hair was waiting. "Ms. Azell?" he asked. Wilma nodded. "I'm David Park, building manager." "Welcome." He extended his hand, and Wilma shook it, surprised by how firm and respectful his grip was. "Mr. Willis spoke very highly of you," David said as he led her down a hallway. "Said you were the hardest worker he'd ever met. Someone who understood the value of doing things right." Wilma's throat tightened. "He said that?" "He did." David stopped at an office, small but clean, with a window overlooking the city. "This is your office. Your team reports at 8. You'll oversee maintenance, cleaning, and building operations. It's a lot of responsibility, but Mr. Willis assures me you can handle it." Wilma stepped into the office, touching the desk, the chair, the window that let in so much light. "I won't let you down," she whispered. David smiled. "I don't think that's possible." The weeks turned into months. Wilma woke each morning not with dread, but with purpose. She managed her team with the same kindness she'd always carried, remembering what it felt like to be invisible, to be overlooked. She learned names. She listened. She helped where she could. And slowly, the hollow feeling that had lived in her chest for so long began to fill with something else. Pride. Peace. Hope. Every Saturday at 3 o'clock, a black car pulled up outside Wilma's new apartment, a modest but clean place on a quiet street where children played and neighbors said hello. Jose would step out, Quan beside him. And for 1 hour, they would walk through the nearby park together, Wilma, Jose, and the dog who had brought them together. At first, they barely spoke. The silence was comfortable, necessary. But gradually, conversation came. Jose told her about his childhood in Korea, about coming to America with nothing, about building something from violence and fear because he didn't know any other way. Wilma told him about her own struggles, about losing her parents young, about learning that survival sometimes meant going without. They were, in many ways, the same. People who'd learned to expect nothing and give everything. And Quan walked between them, his presence a reminder of the moment that had changed both their lives. One Saturday, 6 months after the day the black cars came, Jose and Wilma sat on a park bench while Quan chased a ball a child had dropped. "Do you ever regret it?" Jose asked suddenly. "Helping him?" Wilma looked at him, surprised. "Never. Why would I? Your life became complicated because of it. Dangerous." Wilma shook her head. "My life became possible because of it." She gestured around them, at the park, the children, the sunlight filtering through the trees. "I was surviving before. Now I'm living. There's a difference." Jose was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You changed me." "I didn't do anything," Wilma said softly. "You showed me that goodness still exists. That kindness is real, not just a weakness to exploit." Jose's voice was low. "I still do what I do. I'm still what I am. But now, I try to balance it. For every dark thing I'm part of, I try to do something light. It's not enough to erase the bad. But it's something." Wilma reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. "It's more than something." Kwon returned with the ball and dropped it at Wilma's feet, tail wagging. She threw it, laughing as he bounded after it. "He still loves you more than me," Jose said, but he was smiling. "He loves us both," Wilma said. "In different ways." That night, Wilma stood at her apartment window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, hungry, alone, invisible. And she thought about who she was now. Not rich. Not famous. Not powerful. But seen. Safe. Valued. All because she'd fed a starving dog. All because she'd chosen kindness when the world had given her every reason to choose otherwise. Wilma smiled and whispered into the quiet apartment. "Thank you." Not to Jose. Not to fate or chance or luck. But to herself. For being brave enough to care when caring seemed foolish. For having a heart that hunger couldn't shrink. For believing that small acts of goodness could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. She had fed a devil's dog with a smile. And in return, she'd been given a life worth living.